Greetings, everyone. Today, I am going to my most dangerous trip to Minecraft Nether and also start building automated drill system. As we work, I'll share some of the creepiest stories I found on Reddit. I found some really good ones today, so let's get started. Our first story today comes from the r/nosleep subreddit, written by user Steve McNally Fiction. My team was sent to a supermarket that had been empty for 10 months. The call came after we had already gone to bed for the night. The loud, sudden sound of our station's alarm speaker woke me up from a light sleep, making me sit up in my bed. The words "fire response" came from the speaker as I checked the alert on my phone. I realized only about 30 minutes had passed since I closed my eyes. My phone showed "forced entry, person trapped inside a building," followed by an address that I didn't think much about at the time. I wasn't super tired. I rarely sleep deeply during night shifts at the fire station, so I was able to get out of my bunk and move quickly to the equipment room without feeling too sleepy. It was a very cold winter night, but our usual sleeping room always stays around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I had gone to bed wearing my normal clothes, black gym shorts and a gray t-shirt. The equipment room, on the other hand, tends to match the outside temperature very closely. So I mentally got ready to step out into the freezing winter air wearing almost nothing but underwear. The cold hit me hard, and I couldn't stop shivering as I walked past Osgood and Fuller, who were already putting on their fire pants and fixing their suspenders. "Feeling a bit cold there, rookie?" Osgood said. I had been with the department for over 3 months by this point, but as the newest person on the team, I still hadn't lost the nickname. "A little," I said, reaching my locker and starting to step into my pants. "Maybe you can cuddle me when we get back, Aussie." The team started laughing. Learning how to make them laugh was one of the first things I learned on the job. Once we all had our pants on, we gathered the rest of our gear and headed toward the truck bay. Price, our driver, was already in the driver's seat of the rescue truck. His gear was stored in the cab where Fuller and I would be riding. It always amazed me how fast he got ready for night calls. The other firefighters often said that he didn't sleep during night shifts. Instead, he spent the whole night in the bay, waiting for a call that might never come. Fuller and I climbed into the cab, and Osgood sat in the officer's seat in the front. Price had the rescue truck pulling out of the bay before I even had my seatbelt on. "You have the address, right, Price?" Osgood asked our driver. Price nodded. "Yes. Do you recognize it?" "Yes," the driver said again. "How could someone possibly be trapped in there?" "I don't know," Price replied, "but I don't like it." "What's so strange about that address?" I asked, confused by their conversation. "It's the location of that supermarket that closed down a while ago," Fuller said. "Not just closed," Osgood added. 10 months ago, it was completely abandoned without warning. It stayed closed ever since. There's no way someone could be trapped inside. "Maybe some teenagers broke in or something," I suggested. "What did the report say?" "Someone called 911 saying they were stuck," Osgood explained. "They managed to say, 'I can't get out,' a few times before hanging up. Dispatch couldn't get any more details from the caller before the line went dead." "Maybe it's someone playing a joke," I offered. Fuller shook his head. "The notes say the call came from the landline in the office at the back of the store. Whoever made the call was definitely inside the building." Price briefly looked toward Osgood as he drove. "So what's the plan, officer?" Osgood, clearly not finding anything useful on the tablet he was looking at on the dashboard, flipped through a binder of old plans resting on his lap. When he found the right page, he spent half a minute reading it. "We'll go around to the back and enter through the rear door," he finally said. "Are you boys ready for some forced entry?" "Yes," Fuller replied. He looked at me. "You take the Halligan tool, I'll take the axe." I nodded. "All right." Our conversation stopped as we continued our drive to the call location. The outside cold seeped into the cab as we drove, and I soon found myself shivering again. Putting on my fire coat helped with the cold, but I still really wished I could be back in that 100-degree sleeping room. I silently blamed whoever had called us on such a brutal winter night. We were almost definitely being pranked by some kids. With any luck, we would arrive at the scene, find them outside without ever needing to enter the building. where we could quickly tell them off for wasting emergency resources before returning to the warmth and comfort of our station. We still had a long, cold night ahead of us, and I hoped that this would be our only call before my shift ended at 6 o'clock in the morning. Osgood looked at Fuller and me in the rearview mirror. "Put your packs on now, boys," he told us. "I want everyone on air. We aren't taking any chances with the air quality in this place, considering how long it's been sealed." "Do you think it's going to be dangerous in there?" Fuller asked. "Don't know," Osgood answered. "But it can't hurt to be careful." I held back the urge to groan. Going on air meant we would have to refill the tanks when we got back. Of course, we could have simply swapped out the used tanks for fresh ones and left them in the engine bay until morning, but if Osgood didn't insist on refilling them right away, then Price most certainly would. Our long night had just become a few minutes longer. Osgood, Fuller, and I all put our SCBA units over our shoulders and started adjusting the straps. Price's pack was in a compartment just outside the driver's side door, so he wouldn't be able to put it on until after we arrived. None of us put on our masks yet. We knew we would likely need to force the rear door, and we didn't want our face coverings fogging up from the effort. We reached the strip mall with the abandoned supermarket and had to drive the length of the shopping center before we could loop around to the back. Much like our destination, most, if not all, of the storefronts along the strip looked to be empty. It was hard to see any details in the dark, but from where I sat in the cab, I could see that several storefronts didn't have any signs or branding out front, and those that did have these elements looked to be in various states of repair. The road we drove on, as well as the parking lot to our left, was full of potholes, with row after row of completely broken or quickly flickering streetlights. The whole place felt creepy. It felt like we were driving straight into an apocalyptic wasteland just minutes from our fire station. Price pulled around to the back, and we got out of the rescue truck. Osgood walked toward the rear of the supermarket while Price put on his SCBA, and Fuller and I got a set of irons from the truck's rescue tool compartment. We had also each grabbed a flashlight from the cab of the truck before stepping outside. They hung from our sides by their straps, gently bumping against our hips as we approached the building. The building's back wall was made of old, faded, crumbling brick. A single loading dock with a rusty iron shutter was built into a section of the wall. A few yards from this dock, a small concrete platform was accessible by both stairs and a ramp made of the same material. A metal door was at the top of the platform on the same wall as the shutter. Osgood was already standing outside the store. Price was walking up the steps while Fuller and I approached with our tools. I followed Fuller up the stairs to the platform and stepped forward, ready to wedge the fork end of my Halligan into the door frame. Price stopped me by placing a firm hand on my shoulder before shaking his head. "Don't they teach you to try before you pry anymore, rookie?" he asked. I frowned, stepping back. "They do," I replied, feeling embarrassed. "Sorry," Osgood chuckled. "I guess you can't blame the guy for being a bit eager." He wrapped a gloved hand around the door's handle, gripped the latch, and pulled. To my surprise, the door offered no resistance as it came free from its frame. Osgood noticed the change in my expression and grinned. "Don't look so surprised," he said. "The collar had to get in somehow, after all." "Yes," I agreed. "I guess you're right." Osgood let go of the door and let it swing back into place. "All right," he announced. "Let's get on air and get this over with." We followed our officer's instructions, pulling our masks over our faces before opening our air tanks. I heard my SCBA's low-pressure alarm sound briefly, signaling new airflow, before I attached my regulator to my mask. My next breath delivered a small burst of air into my mask, gently touching my mouth and nose. We were all ready, and our breathing was slow and steady. Osgood reopened the door. Price entered first, followed by Fuller, and then myself, with our officer bringing up the rear. The metal door creaked shut behind us, cutting our connection to the outside world. All four of us turned on our flashlights and started sweeping the beams across our new surroundings. We found ourselves in a small, dark hallway. Its walls were made of plain, off-white brick, and its floor was a long stretch of worn gray vinyl. Thousands of particles, which I assumed at the time to be dust, floated and swirled all around us. "Fire department," Osgood shouted. His voice sounded strange and far away through his SCBA's amplifier. Getting no response, he lowered his voice and spoke to us. The pre-plan says the office should be just ahead. He led the way down the passage until we reached a door on the left wall. It was slightly open. The space beyond was covered in darkness. "This should be it," he said. Osgood slowly pushed the door open, letting the flashlight attached to his fire coat light up the space beyond the doorway. He then stepped carefully inside. "Fire department," he called again. "Is anyone in here?" The rest of us stayed in the hallway while our officer searched the office. All three of our pass systems, the loud alarms on our SCBAs that go off when we stay still for too long, started to sound as we waited. We all had to shake our SCBAs to silence the alarms, a move that had become second nature to us. After about 30 to 40 seconds in the office, Osgood came back out into the hall and closed the door behind him. "It's empty," he reported, "but the phone is off the hook. It has a dial tone." "So, someone was actually here then," I said. Fuller looked down the hallway we had just come from. "But why would they need to call 911 when they were this close to the exit?" Osgood shrugged. "Your guess is as good as mine, but I believe someone really made that call from inside this place. Maybe it was a prank after all," I suggested. "Possibly," Price agreed. "It doesn't change the fact that we still have to search this whole place." "How's everyone doing on air?" Osgood asked. After confirming we all had plenty of air left, he continued. "Let's get this done. If we're quick about it, we can finish our search without needing to go back for fresh tanks." He led us down the hall until we reached another metal door at the far end. This barrier was different from the previous one, and it was already partially open. This was a strange detail considering the other door, identical in type, had closed on its own. This odd thing had clearly worried all four of us. As we exchanged looks that showed our fear, even though our faces were mostly hidden by our masks. As a side note, what a small detail to notice. One door swung shut and this one didn't. These firefighters are really thorough. Anyway, let's continue. Osgood carefully approached the door. He tried to push it open but was immediately met with resistance. He then braced his forearm against the barrier and gave it a hard push. The door still resisted, but with a lot of effort, he managed to create enough of an opening for us to pass through. With the passage clear, he stepped inside. The heavy metal door stayed fixed in place even after he had moved past it. "Jesus!" we heard Osgood say from the other side of the doorway. Price quickly followed our officer through the doorway. Fuller went after him, and I brought up the rear. The space on the other side of the doorway was as dark as the hallway had been, but our 4 flashlight beams did their best to light up our new environment. More particles, denser and more concentrated in their gathering, swirled around us. They were so plentiful that our lights struggled to shine through their haze, but we had just enough light to see that we were in a stockroom behind the main store. The walls, ceiling, floor, and shelves were all covered in a thick layer of fungus. The mass looked like a single, huge, always growing organism, frantically looking for more space to consume with its long, root-like tendrils. Looking at the ground, I could see that the door we had just entered through had been forced to scrape along the fungus in order to open. It was now held in place by the layer of fungus, which had stuck to the bottom of the door with the buildup of scraped material. "What in the world happened in here?" I asked. "Good question," Osgood replied. "I've seen some bad situations in my career, but nothing quite like this." "I think we've seen enough to leave now," Fuller said. "Anyone who made their way in here would likely have died within minutes of breathing this air. This clearly isn't a rescue attempt anymore. If anything, it's a recovery. All the more reason we need to keep going," Price insisted. "If someone is still alive in here, we need to get them out immediately. We're not properly equipped for this," Fuller argued. "We should be in hazmat suits in an environment like this, not fire gear." Price shrugged. "It doesn't make a difference now that we're already in the thick of it." "Price is right," Osgood said. "We need to at least check this storage area. If we find no evidence of anyone being present, we'll leave, call in hazmat, and go through decontamination. But we must be fast. Fuller, you'll search to the left with me, while Price and the rookie head to the right." Fuller sighed, showing his frustration, but offered no further objection. Osgood looked at Price. "Radio us if you find anything." The driver nodded, and our two small groups went in opposite directions. I wasn't sure what to say to my partner. He had always been the quietest person at my station to start a conversation, so we moved in silence as we did our search. We followed the mold-covered wall, moving past shelves eaten by fungus. After rounding a corner, we encountered another metal door, mostly hidden by the mass, identifiable only by the handle sticking out from the blanket of mold. "Based on the pre-plan, I think this door leads to the loading dock," Price said. He grabbed the handle and tried to open the door, but it stayed firmly shut. "It's locked, but I doubt we'll need to go in there anyway. This door looks like it's been closed for a long time. Any possible victim in here wouldn't have made it past this." We continued for another minute or so before spotting Osgood and Fuller. When we reached them, we found them waiting in front of a pair of swinging doors. One of the doors was slightly open, pushed outward and stuck in place, much like the metal door had been. "You took so long that I was about to radio you," Osgood commented. "We were looking at something back there," Price explained. He pointed towards the fungus-covered double doors. "I'm guessing you two didn't push that open, right?" Our officer asked, which meant whoever was in here went further inside. "This means we need to continue." I expected another protest from Fuller, but he stayed quiet. After another quick air check, during which we confirmed we all had about 3/4 of our tanks remaining, we went into the store itself. Osgood pushed against the stuck door, similar to how he had the previous one, before leading the way into the space beyond. I hadn't believed the particles, the mold spores, could have possibly gotten worse, but I was wrong. They were so thick and widespread that I could barely see beyond their heavy curtain. The haze partly reflected my flashlight's beam back at me. It felt like I was surrounded by the smoke of a burning building, or like I had been swallowed by a heavy, hungry fog. As a side note, is anyone else thinking of The Last of Us? Because I am. An even greater amount of mold covered this new area. It grew in the shadows beyond the reach of my flashlight and oozed from a nearby frozen food chiller, making the waist-high container look like it was overflowing with ice. "Fire department," Osgood called out again. "Is anyone in here?" His echoing voice was the only response he got. "It's going to take us forever to search this place," Fuller said. "Not if we move quickly," Osgood countered. "Same pairs as before. We'll go along the outer wall. If we haven't found anything by the time we meet up, then we'll start searching the aisles one by one." "Any questions?" No one answered. "Good. Now, let's get this done before we start running low on air." Osgood and Fuller once again started moving left along the outer wall of the supermarket, while Price and I started moving to the right. I glanced in our partner's direction after taking only a few steps and was a little alarmed to see that the beams of their flashlights had already been completely swallowed by the swirling mold spores. In a matter of seconds, it was like they had never existed at all. I walked with Price for another couple of minutes, sweeping my flashlight with one hand and holding my Halligan with the other. I hadn't used the tool since entering the building and thought about offering it to my partner, who held nothing in his hands. He, like Osgood, had a flashlight attached to his coat. However, I decided against it. I feared the older man might think I was trying to dump the Halligan on him, and I didn't want him thinking I was being lazy. The silence in that space was almost overwhelming. It was like the cloud of mold was blocking any and all background sound that would have otherwise gotten through, while at the same time creating a harsh noise that rattled my brain and threatened to destroy me from within. The only sounds to break the heavy quiet were the soft crunch of our boots on the mildewed ground and the steady, artificial rhythm of our controlled breathing. I rechecked my oxygen tank's gauge as we moved forward, noting little change since my last check. Despite the small change, a knot of worry tightened in my stomach, fueled by the fear of running critically low on air in this completely unwelcoming environment. While I understood the system was designed to trigger a low-pressure alert long before a truly dangerous situation arose, my mind kept imagining a darker possibility: the chance of a critical system failure, leaving me gasping for air against my own mask without warning. Suddenly, I'd be faced with a hard choice between immediate suffocation and breathing in whatever toxic stuff filled this place. The silence, so deep, eventually became a physical weight. Fearing using more oxygen, I broke it. What do you think turned this place into this? I asked. Price gave no immediate answer, and for a brief moment, I thought he might choose to stay silent. Then his voice, amplified and with a synthetic quality, came out. No clue, he said. Never seen anything quite like this. As we continued our slow progress, my gaze drifted to some of the nearby refrigerated units. Through the cloudy film of mold covering their glass fronts, I could see endless rows of frozen meals, still neatly arranged on their shelves. I guess they just left, leaving everything behind. I thought out loud. Maybe that's what started all this fungal growth. This place has been empty for under a year, Price countered. It shouldn't have gotten this bad in such a short time. I thought about his statement for a moment. Well, I guess the exact cause doesn't matter right now, I agreed. Our only goal is finding a possible survivor, and that's our immediate priority. Price gave a nod of agreement. Exactly. Leave the more complex analysis to those with higher clearance. Glad to see you're getting the basics, rookie. We continued in silence for another minute or so, my flashlight beam carefully sweeping the path ahead, though its effectiveness was clearly reduced in the heavy gloom. The hazy cloud of spores seemed to get thicker with every step, its increasing density actively blocking our light. It was this very blockage that made me question the quick movements I saw from the edge of my vision. I stopped suddenly, pointing my flashlight beam down the suspicious aisle. Price, copying my action, also stopped and turned. What is it? He asked. I'm not entirely sure, I replied. I had a quick impression of something moving down there. A person. I can't definitely say, I repeated. It's possible, or it could just be my eyes playing tricks in this heavy atmosphere. We should check anyway. I showed a moment of hesitation. Are you sure we should leave our planned route? We told Aussie and Fuller that we wouldn't explore individual aisles until we met up. It could be the missing person, Price suggested. He then raised his hand to the radio mic clipped to his collar. Price to Aussie. Pause. Osgood's voice, distorted by static, crackled through. Go ahead, Price. The rookie thinks he saw movement in one of the aisles. We're going to do a quick check. We'll report any findings. Copy that, Osgood responded. Be careful. Price nodded, a gesture lost on the unseen recipient. Always. We started our slow, careful advance down the aisle. Almost without thinking, I glanced upwards at the sign directly above me as we passed. We had entered the canned goods section. A small smile touched my lips. Those items, I thought, would likely still be good to eat, if one was willing to dig them out from the fungal covering. That assessment, however, hardly applied to most other goods in this store. Fire department, Price announced, saying the familiar words. Is anyone here? A deep silence followed. Price and I reached the aisle's midpoint, exactly where I had detected the earlier oddity. Our flashlight beams carefully searched the area, showing no visible results. As far as we could tell, this passage was completely empty, lined on both sides by preserved food covered in an ever-growing layer of decay. See anything? My partner asked. After I shook my head no, he reached for his radio again. Price to Aussie, false alarm. We'll return to the perimeter and resume our assigned search. His message was suddenly cut off by the violent shattering of glass behind us. Price pulled his hand from the radio, and together we turned to face the source of the noise. A few yards away on the floor lay the broken pieces of what I could just make out as a shattered jar, its contents mixing with the ever-present mold. Are you all right, Price? Osgood's voice, thin and strained, came from the radio. Price ignored the question. Instead, he and I exchanged a brief, meaningful look before carefully approaching the broken container. Hello, Price called out. Is someone there? His words were suddenly cut short by a sharp cry as his feet were pulled from under him, sending him crashing onto his back with a sickening thud. Price started to slide across the damp floor, pushed in the direction we had just been going. His muffled shouts were distorted by the grating screech of his breathing apparatus scraping against the surface. I rushed forward into the darkness after my suddenly still partner, but his speed was much faster than my ability to catch up. He was about to disappear into the shadows when he managed to grab a shelf divider, stopping his uncontrolled slide. The unseen force pulling him continued its relentless pull, but he held on with enough strength for me to reach his side. Wrapped around his leg was a long, twisting arm-like thing, its length disappearing into the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. It pulled with desperate strength, trying to wrench Price free from his shaky anchor. Letting go of my flashlight, letting it hang from its strap by my hip, I gripped my Halligan tool with both hands, raising it above my head before bringing the forked end down with strong force upon the aggressively pulsing tendril. Matter was split from matter as both sections of the tentacle, now separated, twisted independently. The part that had wrapped around Price's leg loosened its grip and started to writhe violently on the ground. The longer, cut part quickly pulled back from the impact, disappearing into the heavy darkness. Holding my Halligan in one hand and grabbing Price by the arm with the other, we pulled back from the twisting mass as I helped him to his feet. After a brief rest to regain our composure, we carefully moved toward Price's attacker. In the faint light of my flashlight, it looked like a snake-like, fleshy tendril, a disgusting mix of fungal and organic matter. It continued to twist on the floor, but without the support of a larger body, its movements were useless. A brief aside, this situation brings up a level 99 nope. Seriously, I'd be getting myself out of this scenario right away. If you ever found yourself lost in a place like the Last of Us grocery store, I'd express my sincerest apologies. What in God's name is that? I asked, my voice tight. No idea, Price replied, his breathing hard. But we need to leave this place. A sudden, faint hissing sound registered, making me lean closer to Price. My stomach dropped as I recognized the sound of his quickly depleting air supply. I think your tank got damaged during that creature's attack, I said, my voice urgent. We must get you to a clean area immediately. Not until we find the others, Price insisted. We can both draw air from your supply for a short time if necessary. He skillfully turned a dial on his radio. I'm contacting dispatch, trying to reach Aussie and Fuller. As he started his message to the outside command, I brought my own hand to my radio mic, pressing the button to start my own broadcast. This is Search Team 2 reporting to Search Team 1, I announced. A brief silence followed, during which no answer was received. Come in, Aussie. Are you there? More silence greeted my call. Osgood, Fuller, can either of you respond? I'm unable to reach dispatch, Price reported. Something is apparently interfering with the signal. No success reaching the others either, I added. Damn it, he said. Then we'll have to just... A horrible, piercing wail suddenly erupted from both of our radios, its intensity so overwhelming that we could tell its original source coming from the far side of the building. The radio itself was unnecessary in broadcasting that raw, desperate cry of primal distress. That sounded like Fuller, Price said, our eyes meeting in the direction of the scream. He had barely finished his words before the insistent blare of a personal alert device shattered the surrounding atmosphere. Without even a glance in my direction, Price ran toward the loud, insistent sound. I cast one final look at the still writhing mass of matter before speeding up to follow him. I matched his pace, and together we ran from our aisle, converging on the source of the commotion. The personal alert's volume and urgency increased as we ran, ending in its final, ear-splitting peak. Rounding a corner, we found ourselves surrounded by its overwhelming sound. The sound came from the area formerly known as the store's butcher shop. A huge, waving mass of mold-filled flesh had burst from the remains of the display case, which had long since given way to the pressure from the abomination before us. The fungal mound of once living tissue pulsed and heaved as its dark, shapeless body continued to grow into the space beyond the broken display. We quickly identified the source of the persistent alert, the dense, fleshy shape of one of our colleagues. It was Osgood, standing still as the wall of flesh covered the last parts of his body. His personal alert became muffled as the mass closed around any remaining openings that might have let sound escape. The screaming SCBA's flashing amber lights continued to shine through the macabre coffin before being completely swallowed. What looked like the outlines of many limbs, torsos, and even faces stuck out from the writhing pile of organic material. The quiet, pained groans of our swallowed teammate joined a mix of unclear sounds coming from the mound of wriggling death. "I can't get out," I thought I heard one voice say. Another seemed to whisper the word "stuck," though I couldn't be certain. Their words sounded more like the primal screams of terrified animals than clear human speech. "Mother of God," Price muttered beside me. Fuller stood at the very edge of this growing mass. Several fleshy tendrils were wrapped around his legs, torso, and hips, pulling him downward as he desperately swung an axe at his attackers. I rushed to Fuller's side, starting the hard task of cutting the tendrils with my Halligan. He managed to cut one of the sinewy vines as I worked, but two more quickly took its place, easily avoiding his next strikes. One wrapped around his neck, while another splattered against his mask. The mask broke with such force that it knocked his regulator loose. I heard his scream for only a brief moment before the mass surged into his mouth and nostrils, completely covering his face. Without thinking, I tried to pull back from the mound of twisting tissue, but my movement was stopped when a fungal tendril lashed out, grabbing my boot. Price rushed forward, snatching the axe from Fuller's grasp just as the flesh finished taking its victim. He brought the axe down upon the material creeping up my boot. I managed to pull my foot free from the larger mass and shake off any remaining organic matter, freeing myself. "Come on," Price urged, turning and running away from the growing wall of death without looking to confirm I was following. Needless to say, I followed. I also looked away from our lost teammates, fearing that a final glimpse of the monstrous formation of flesh, so desperately trying to add us to its ranks, would break my resolve. We cut through the nearest aisle in our frantic flight toward the exit. Tendrils of organic matter shot toward us as we fled, each of us using our chosen tools as makeshift weapons against our approaching enemies. Fungal flesh splattered across the nearby shelves. We didn't pause to admire the grim art we left behind. Soon, our escape route came into view. A rush of renewed hope filled me, only to be quickly killed when I realized I was running alone. I spun around, spotting Price crouched on the floor a few yards behind me. He was desperately hacking at and trying to connect a regulator that was no longer supplying him with air. In my panicked flight, I had failed to notice the insistent chirping of his low air alarm. I had no idea how long he had been struggling against his basic need to breathe. A tentacle exploded from the surrounding darkness, wrapping itself around the arm holding his axe. I took a step toward him, but he used his free hand to rip his suffocating regulator from his mask. "Go!" he shouted, as spores flooded his lungs. Two more tendrils grabbed him, dragging him deeper into the shadows. He made no scream, even as they used the new opening in his mask to make themselves at home. I turned and ran away from my partner. The journey to the swinging doors leading to the storage area felt endless, but at long last, I crossed that threshold. My flight continued, my breathing a series of heavy, mechanical gasps as I reached the partially open door that gave access to the rear hallway. I doubted I had the strength to push my heavy, sweat-soaked body through that narrow opening, yet somehow I managed to get through to the other side. The outside was now in sight. All that remained was crossing the seemingly endless stretch of the hallway. Something grabbed onto my back, stopping my progress. My next step became heavier, as did the one after, until forward motion was impossible. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw multiple tendrils firmly attached to the back of my SCBA. I frantically started tearing at my air pack straps, silently cursing how well it was secured. Eventually, everything came loose, leaving only a single strap over my shoulder. I took one final, desperate breath from my regulator before ripping it free from my mask and pulling the bottom of my hood up to cover the new opening. I then released the SCBA strap from my shoulder. The air pack fell backward into the tendrils that so stubbornly pulled against it. In that same instant, I managed to break free from the lost air source and rushed the remaining distance toward my escape. My lungs burned as I threw open the metal door that separated me from the outside world. I scrambled onto the concrete platform and quickly slammed the door shut behind me. It wasn't until I was going down the stairs and halfway to the rescue truck that I finally lowered my hood and took in a large, gasping breath. Fresh air had never tasted so good, but I had no time to enjoy it. I hurried to the rescue truck, climbed into the passenger seat, and reached for the radio attached to the center console. My hand, however, didn't even complete half the distance before the speaker crackled to life with the pained, tortured wails of my 3 lost teammates. Wow, that was some captivating writing from Steve McNally fiction. Shout out to you. At this point, just burn the place down before you start an apocalypse. But geez, the OP was lucky to make it out of there alive. Incredibly lucky. Anyways, let me know what you guys thought of that one, and let's go ahead and get on with the next one. The next story today is from our /nosleep from user more_tanks. I'm a paramedic. We were called to a pregnant woman's house outside the city. Our shift was already well underway. 12 hours of nonstop pressure. Luckily, the night was shaping up to be quiet, or at least as quiet as it ever gets when you're a paramedic. So far, we'd only had 2 calls. An elderly woman slipped in her bathtub and broke her leg. Calls like that were always hard. The elderly are helpless, vulnerable. Thankfully, her husband had called 911 in time. The other was a traffic accident. No serious injuries, fortunately. One of the drivers still had to be taken to the hospital for observation. After that, nothing. No more calls. We pulled into a gas station to take a break. Just me and Ruby. Ruby was almost 10 years younger than I was. When I first got her as a rookie, I wasn't thrilled. Training a young woman, being the one who had to show her the things the human body can do to itself when it breaks, it wasn't something I was eager for. But 4 years had passed since then, and Ruby had adapted to wading through blood, to arriving too late or too early, to the silence that settles in after a shift is over. Those things became routine for us, our crosses to bear. We carried them, and aside from each other, there wasn't really anyone else we could rely on. Ambulance 18, we have a call. The radio crackled to life, pulling me out of my thoughts. Pregnant woman has collapsed. This is 18, I replied immediately, grabbing the radio. What's the situation? We have limited information, the dispatcher said. The husband called it in. Can you respond and check it out? Copy that, I said, flipping on the siren to signal Ruby, who was outside by the gas pump drinking her coffee. We're on our way. We tore through the streets with the siren screaming. The adrenaline always hit me like a wave in moments like that. We were flying because in our line of work, time is everything. By then, I knew most routes by instinct. The MDT guided us all the way to the edge of the city. The road turned rough and uneven, and the GPS started giving us increasingly unreliable positioning. Ruby, ask dispatch for more precise address. I said, keeping my eyes on the rutted road. Dispatch. Ruby leaned closer to the radio. This is Ambulance 18. Can you confirm the exact location? Copy Ambulance 18. The dispatcher replied, her voice crackling through the static. The husband says if you follow the old road, the first dirt road on the left leads to it. First mansion down that way. Copy that, dispatch. Ruby said, glancing at me. What is it? I asked, scanning the darkness for the dirt road. A mansion? Ruby shot me a sideways look. We're heading to rich people, Jacob. Hope you dressed classy. I let out a tired laugh and finally turned onto the dirt road. Farther ahead, the outline of a massive building began to appear. In the darkness, it barely showed itself, like a sleeping mountain. Rich people don't live in places like that anymore. Ruby, I said, pointing toward the old structure. That kind of thing went out of style. Ruby just smiled. The mansion looked both ancient and imposing. Its massive walls stretched upward into the night sky. Every window was shuttered, yet a faint glow leaked out from behind them, like the eyes of some enormous creature watching us. This is creepy, Ruby said flatly. A little, I replied as I pulled the ambulance to a stop in front of the mansion. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the mansion's dirty, time-worn walls. Shadows twisted and stretched like ghosts. For a brief moment, the thought crossed my mind that I didn't want to go inside. Then, As if something had sensed our hesitation, the massive front door swung open. A young boy ran out toward us waving frantically. "Hurry, hurry," the boy screamed in terror, and when he reached the ambulance, he began pounding on its side with his small fists. Ruby jumped out without a word, and I heard the rear doors of the ambulance swing open. I stepped out as well. The instant my footwear touched the wet earth, a young boy grabbed my forearm, yanking me back and forth as if I were a toy. "Quickly, please," he begged, his voice strained. "Hurry for my sister. Please, make haste." His clothes were simple, made from worn, thick cloth, giving him an air of having stepped from a past time. He looked more like a rural worker from centuries ago, or perhaps a child from a closed community, rather than a modern youth. The intermittent red and blue of emergency lights twisted his features into a disturbing mask. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and even then, it was clear something was deeply wrong with him. As harsh as it may sound, my gaze flickered over him with an involuntary grimace. "Hurry!" he nearly shrieked. "It's imminent. Please, make haste." "Where are your parents?" I asked, beginning to move with him toward the building. He pulled insistently at my arm, a thin stream of saliva escaping his lips in his agitation, pulling me toward the open doorway. Ruby caught up to us, the emergency medical kit slung over her shoulder, watching the interaction between myself and the boy. Her expression was tight and worried. "Edmund," a voice boomed suddenly from the doorway. "Remove yourself from there. Have you nothing more pressing to attend to?" Only then did I lift my head. A man stood in the doorway, appearing almost ghost-like. The dim light made him hard to see, but a warm light spilled from behind him, coming from within the grand house. He was bald, advanced in years, likely around 60, and dressed in a long, dark woolen garment reminiscent of church clothing. At the man's words, the boy froze, falling silent. He still held my hand, his body swaying slightly. "Jacob?" Ruby asked, her tone hesitant. Without warning, the boy let go of me and ran like a dog escaping its leash, vanishing into the darkness between the trees, crying out for help, lamenting for his sister. "Kindly step inside," the man said calmly. "Pardon Edmund. He is a challenging case." It did not quite. His sentence faded into an ellipsis. Ruby and I exchanged a look. We walked up the mansion steps, and I found myself standing before an imposing black wooden door, nearly 10 feet in height. Warmth and light radiated from within. The man turned and went inside. Ruby and I followed. The man, dressed like a priest, showed no sign of hurry. I could sense Ruby's clear tension. She looked as though she wished to break into a sprint, as per our training. Reach the patient with utmost speed. Find out who needs help, the severity of their condition, and the extent of assistance needed. Yet, the man maintained a slow, unhurried walk. Perhaps it was his age, or perhaps he underestimated the seriousness of the situation. Ruby and I followed him in deliberate silence. The mansion felt even more spacious on the inside than it had from the outside, and exactly as I had expected, it was empty of furniture. No decorations, no artwork adorned the walls, merely an empty, cavernous space. Only the lights were on, casting a muted, yellowish glow. Homes of this size were no longer occupied by the old wealthy families. Our footsteps echoed through the vast, hall-like space as we walked through it. Ruby cast a glance my way as we proceeded. I merely returned her gaze briefly, not wishing her to perceive my unease, which mirrored hers. We needed to maintain our composure. "Excuse me, sir." Ruby finally broke the silence, a thread of impatience weaving into her voice. "Shouldn't we be moving with a bit more urgency?" We were informed that a pregnant woman is in a precarious state. The bald, thin man stopped suddenly, as if genuinely surprised. Then, with deliberate slowness, like a machine, he turned to face us. He attempted a kind smile, but upon his tired, hollowed face, the expression appeared unsettling. His deep gray eyes did not rest on Ruby. They fixed on me, as if I were the one who had spoken. "Now that you are here," the priest stated calmly, "she will be perfectly well. He offered us a broad, toothy grin. His discolored, unkempt molars stood in stark contrast against his pale face. I could not suppress the grimace that mirrored his. There was an intrinsic unease about the man's presence. He then turned away, shuffling forward along the same path. "What in the world?" Ruby whispered, falling a step behind. "Jacob, this is deeply unsettling. This gentleman, the estate, the child, the entire scenario." I understand. I responded quietly, trying to calm her. "But this is where we were directed. We must attend to the woman." "Do not be naive," Ruby muttered. "There is no woman present." "She is here," the priest interrupted, pausing beside a long, curved staircase leading to the second level. Ruby looked at the elderly gentleman with scrutiny. I sensed he was deeply unsettling her, yet there was little I could do to ease it. "She is upstairs?" I asked, partly to reassure Ruby and partly to convince myself. The man grinned at us again, his teeth bared. "Yes," he said sweetly, "upstairs. She requires assistance." I stole a glance at Ruby. It was clear she had absolutely no desire to go up. "You will not accompany us?" I pressed. A sense of unease was now clear within me. I had a strong feeling that something on this upper level was deeply wrong. We had no way of verifying if someone was indeed in need of help. "Ah, my legs are not what they once were," the man explained, his smile unchanging. I offered no reply, simply watching him. His long robe extended all the way to his feet, and slippered footwear peeked out from beneath its hem. He stood as if rooted to the spot. "Father?" A voice called from above, from the top step. Ruby and I simultaneously directed our gazes upward. The priest remained motionless. A young man stood on the final step, dressed in a tuxedo, elegant and old-fashioned. His hair was neatly styled, his thin mustache carefully groomed, giving him the appearance of a distinguished gentleman from classic British cinema. "Leave it to me," the young man said. "I shall escort them." With that, he came down the stairs quickly. He stopped before me and, without a moment's hesitation, extended a delicate hand. "Reginald," he introduced himself, shaking mine gently. "A pleasure, and thank you for your prompt arrival. This way, if you please. My wife is not feeling at all well." I looked back at Ruby, and her expression said everything. I was certain that, if I did not insist, she would have already gone back to the ambulance, calling for backup. However, we were compelled to proceed. We had to check on the well-being of the woman. Yes, these individuals were strange, as if removed from modern society by centuries, but we were not in immediate danger. Not yet. A side note, if I may, while I understand their need to reach the patient, I strongly suggest calling for backup, as I have no trust in Reginald. He sends shivers down my spine. Incidentally, does anyone else find them reminiscent of the Addams family? Because they truly do. Nevertheless, let us resume. Reginald moved through the empty corridors and rooms like a ghost. We were still not moving at our usual pace, but the sheer size of the mansion itself felt unnaturally vast, as though it expanded the deeper we went. We were walking down a long hallway when one of the old wooden doors beside us suddenly creaked open. Reginald reacted instantly, positioning himself to block our view. "Vivian, why are you out here?" he scolded, his tone sharp and dismissive. Ruby edged closer to my side, trying to peer past Reginald and catch a glimpse of what I was seeing. A small blonde girl stood in the doorway, her hair messy, inadequately contained by a white head covering. In the dim interior light, the room appeared to be a bedroom. I thought it was time already," the girl mumbled softly. "Not yet, my dear," Reginald replied, gently stroking her cheek. Despite the girl's potential cuteness, her cleft lip made her appearance deeply unsettling. In the darkness behind her, another small figure, with an oversized head, sat up in a bed, peering out with curiosity. "That is enough, children," Reginald raised his voice. "Back to your beds, all of you." With a firm, unquestionable gesture, he guided the girl back into the room and closed the door behind her. "Children," Reginald muttered, shaking his head dramatically. Indeed, I responded, grimacing. Reginald offered no reply. He merely tested the doorknob once more to ensure it was locked, then continued on without explanation. Jacob, this is not right, Ruby whispered again. We should contact dispatch. Get the authorities involved. For what purpose, Ruby? I retorted in a hushed tone. There is no tangible reason to call the police. Yes, they are peculiar and this entire place gives me the creeps. But what am I to report? That there are unsettling children in a bedroom. Ruby shot me a stern look. I knew she was correct. I could feel it in the atmosphere, within the very walls, that something here was deeply wrong. But what could I do? Are you coming? Reginald called out, already considerably ahead of us. We are almost there. My wife is in dire need of you. Ruby's gaze remained fixed on me, her stare both commanding and desperate. We are coming, I called back. Then more softly, come on, Ruby, let's at least check on the woman. If anything becomes even more suspect than this, we will summon assistance. Ruby's lips trembled. I knew she wished to voice her objections, to argue, but there was no time. I merely wanted this ordeal finished so we could leave this place. And here we are, Reginald announced, turning left at the corridor's end. We stopped before a door. It looked like all the others we had passed, except for the huge, vacant-eyed man standing guard beside it. Hello? I said upon noticing the huge brute. He grunted in reply. He wore huge, ill-fitting suspenders over his clothes. The scarring on his chin suggested he had only recently grown out of his teenage years. Yet, his sheer size and his dirty, smudged face made him appear considerably older. The large man stared into space, his mouth open. Ruby pressed close to me, watching everything with the tense alertness of a startled cat. Very well, Reginald said, placing his hand on the doorknob. Before we enter, kindly put on your gloves and masks. You do have them with you, correct? Of course we do, I replied, my suspicion raised. We would have put on our gloves regardless. Yes, he nodded playfully. You know, germs and all that. We have tried to maintain a sterile environment within the room. I stopped listening to Reginald's rambling talk. Ruby set her bag down and took out a pair of medical gloves. We both kept a watchful eye on the dull-witted man as she did so. He was leaning against the doorframe, casually picking his nose, then eating the substance he had extracted. So much for sterility. After I had also put on my medical mask, Reginald nodded with apparent satisfaction, almost cheerfulness. He then pressed the doorknob without any warning. We waited, nearly holding our breath, finally expecting access to the person for whom we had been called. But the desired outcome did not happen. Once more, the door opened into a small room. Gray wallpaper covered the walls, and a damp, musty smell filled the air. The chandelier cast a warm light upon the space, and suddenly, I experienced the familiar feeling I had when I was younger, helping at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Chairs were arranged along the walls, old plastic ones. People were seated in them. The men were all dressed in dark, heavy fabric clothing. The women were dressed in long, black skirts. It looked like some form of Amish communal gathering, but their faces were distorted. Melted noses, cloudy eyes, mouths without lips, missing noses or ears. An abnormal, twisted group engaged in a group meeting. Ruby was practically stepping on my heels. Even so, I could see the sheer terror etched on her face. Her hand trembled near the radio clipped to her white uniform shirt. I had a distinct impression that if even one of them were to move, Ruby would be ready to report it immediately. It appears many people live here, I said to Reginald, who gently guided us further into the room. Oh, they do not live here, Reginald explained. They are simply part of the family. You understand, they came because of the baby. Indeed, Ruby muttered nervously. The twisted group fixed their empty gazes upon us. They watched silently as Reginald moved through them with gentlemanly grace, and we followed behind him slowly, barely daring to breathe. Reginald went to the next door and opened it once more. The room beyond was dim, lit only by a small lamp, which outlined the shape of a bed hidden by a curtain, like a four-poster bed. "Jacob," Ruby whispered from behind me, her voice trembling with fear. "Yes, Ruby?" I whispered back as softly as I could. "I hear it as well." A woman's pained moaning drifted from the room, faint and whimpering, like someone speaking while consumed by fever. "Right this way," Reginald instructed from the doorway. "Ah, it is so dark in here." With that, he turned on the light. Now, not only the silhouette of the bed was visible behind the curtain. Something huge lay upon it, resembling a pile of pillows stacked into a single mound. Ruby and I stood frozen in the doorway. Every instinct within me screamed to turn and flee, to grab Ruby and escape that haunted building with all haste. "My dear," Reginald said, approaching the curtain. "The doctors are here, or whatever they may be. They have come to provide assistance." Then he pulled the curtain aside. I have seen a great deal in my lifetime, but neither Ruby nor I were prepared for this. A woman lay writhing upon the bed, moving with obvious difficulty, her head lolling from side to side. Only the torn remains of her clothing covered her body, hinting at a past job, perhaps in a bistro or a similar place. Her hands were tied to the bed, like those of a prisoner, and her stomach was swollen to the size of a huge sack. Her skin stretched paper thin, the veins beneath appearing on the verge of bursting. The light reflected off it like a tight, translucent membrane. It was so vast that a fully grown man could have fit inside. I was speechless, simply staring, and I fervently wished, dear God, that Ruby had remained frozen as well. "What in blazes?" Ruby gasped in horror. I reached for her hand, trying to stop her movement, but she pulled back in fear. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her backing away into the crowd behind us. While we stood there, stunned by the sight of the woman on the bed, those beings from outside had quietly moved upon us. "To hell with you! Let me go!" Ruby shrieked. Chaos erupted. Events sped up. I spun around, grabbed Ruby's arm, and pulled her close. With my free hand, I shoved away a small, lipless figure that lunged towards us. The crowd remained clustered in the doorway, unmoving. I kept my hold on Ruby, backing away from the door and the grotesquely swollen form. "All right, everyone, back up," I yelled, trying to mask my terror. "Easy now," Reginald warned from beside the bed. "Simply help my wife. No harm will come to you. It is your duty to help those in need." "Like hell it is," I retorted. "I have no idea what you are doing here, but we are leaving. Immediately." Reginald stared at me, his eyes wide. A look of shock washed over his face, as if the idea of refusal had never crossed his mind. "You cannot do that," he blustered. "This woman has carried the Lord of Worlds for 3 years. You cannot abandon her now." Ruby and I continued to retreat until we were nearly pressed against the wall. The crowd, responding to the argument, pressed further into the room. "Jacob," Ruby whispered beside me, pointing at the woman on the bed. Only then did I see it too, and so did Reginald, who had been standing at her side. The woman's stomach rippled, her face twisted in agony, sweat beading on her forehead as her skin turned pale. The signs were unmistakable. "No, no," Reginald cried out in panic. "Not yet." He pressed his head against the stretched membrane of her stomach, listening for any movement within. The tied woman screamed in pain. Blood poured onto the bed as the woman's cries of agony intensified. Thin streams of red flowed onto the floor like a spring. Ruby and I were paralyzed. The scene was one of pure horror. "Damn," Reginald whispered. He suddenly pulled back from the woman as if chased, then ran through a door at the far end of the room, slamming it shut behind him. The crowd erupted into wails, like mourners at a funeral. They clawed at their faces and heads, screaming and sobbing. Ruby remained frozen, but we could not stay. I nudged her shoulder gently and pointed toward the door Reginald had exited through. I tried to slip between the bed and the crowd while they were lost in their collective hysteria. Then something emerged. A horrifying figure began to appear, something that bore no resemblance to a human. Ruby and I were living through the most dreadful nightmare of our existence. "Jacob, help me," the entity said, its voice coming from the woman's body. That was when panic overwhelmed us. We had to flee immediately. I ran for the door, dragging Ruby with me. The crowd surged forward, pouring after us like a living tide. Everything blurred, spinning out of control. I slammed into the door. Locked. I caught a single terrified glance from Ruby. Then I threw myself at it again. The decaying wood splintered, and I crashed into the next room. Ruby stumbled in after me, but something was seriously wrong. Ruby staggered. Red spread across her white uniform. Something was embedded in her side. Her face turned pale, and perhaps fueled by adrenaline. She managed a few more steps before collapsing in the center of the room. "No!" I screamed. A one-eyed, pig-faced figure stood in the doorway, glaring at me. I struck him with such force that I saw red spray from his nose onto the doorframe. The crowd continued to push forward. An enormous woman with no nose charged at me. I kicked her squarely in the chest. She flew backward, knocking others down with her. I leaped back into the room and slammed the door shut. I braced it, then spotted a heavy wardrobe directly beside it. I shoved it in front of the door. "Help me, Jacob!" A voice cried from the other side. It was the entity. I leaned against the wardrobe, holding the door shut as fists hammered against it from the outside. They howled and pounded like wild animals. My eyes fell upon Ruby, lying on the floor. She was seriously injured. Panic flooded me. "Ruby!" I shouted. "Ruby, wake up! Don't do this to me!" She did not move. The knife was deeply embedded in her side. I left the door and rushed to her. Her pulse was barely noticeable. Her face was growing paler by the second. Blood seeped from around the blade. The jump bag was still by the bed in the other room. "Dispatch! This is Ambulance 18. I yelled into my radio. "Send backup. Anyone, police, ambulances. A medic is down." The radio crackled, then went silent. No response. "Dispatch!" I screamed, tears welling up. The door creaked as the wardrobe was pushed aside. Hands forced their way through the gap. A man's blood-red face tried to squeeze through, screaming and snarling. "Ruby, please don't do this to me," I sobbed. I did not get to finish. The door burst open. The twisted figures flooded in. A tall, thin man lunged at me. I tore him away and slammed him to the ground. Survival instinct and raw fury waged war within me. A man slammed into my side, knocking me off balance. Another landed a heavy blow to my face. I staggered but remained upright. I had to. Another figure grabbed my throat with both hands and began to choke me. I drove my fist into his stomach. He doubled over, clutching himself. Two men rushed me at the same time. One clawed wildly at my face. The other latched onto me like dead weight. I retreated. In the dim light, I failed to notice the woman I had struck earlier writhing on the floor. I tripped over her and crashed headlong through the window. Under the combined weight of three bodies, the glass shattered, and we tumbled through it. I hit the muddy ground with a brutal impact. One of them dangled precariously from the gutter. Another landed violently on the earth. I lay there, barely breathing, staring into the darkened night. I could not move. Pain surged through my body as I felt my dislocated arm begin to throb. "Reginald has botched it again," a childish voice said gently. Edmund crouched beside me, holding a snail and calmly watching my broken form. "But I am certain he will begin anew," the boy said, then crushed the snail between his bare fingers. And then, everything faded to black. As consciousness returned, the first blush of dawn was painting the sky. Every part of my being screamed with an agonizing ache, a relentless throb that convinced me not a single bone remained unbroken within me. Yet, miraculously, my legs, despite the searing pain they endured, still held their strength. I forced myself to stand, a shaky effort. My hands were a mess, severely wounded, and my breaths came in ragged, painful gasps, a sharp agony lancing through my side with each inhale. My fingers fumbled for the radio, but instead of familiar plastic, they met sharp, splintered fragments. It was utterly destroyed, and I couldn't even recall the moment it met its end. I began to move, a slow, dragging shuffle, but not toward the waiting ambulance, not to summon help. My steps carried me back into the sprawling mansion. I couldn't abandon Ruby. She was still upstairs. I had to see her to understand what had happened to her. To my utter horror, I discovered that everyone within the house was dead. I found the priest slumped on the staircase, his eyes vacant and rolled back, a dried, frothy blood at the corner of his mouth. In a room further in, I stumbled upon a group of severely malformed children, their fates tragically mirroring the priest's. By the time I ascended to that ghastly room, the world was a dizzying blur around me. Yet here, too, there were no signs of life. Figures lay sprawled haphazardly on the floor, the bed, any surface they had succumbed to. Ruby was gone. All that remained was a vast, crimson stain, a stark testament to her former presence. However, she wasn't the only one absent from the scene. Among the fallen, Reginald was nowhere to be found. It was then that Edmund's words, spoken earlier, echoed through my reeling mind. But I'm sure he'll start over. That particular statement truly tested my patience. To any healthcare professional or first responder, my profound gratitude for your invaluable service. May you never encounter a scenario as harrowing as this. That concludes my collection of unsettling Reddit tales from Minecraft for today. If you found enjoyment in today's presentation, please consider giving a like and subscribing. A special acknowledgement, as always, goes to my channel members. Your unwavering support for the channel is immensely appreciated. Should you wish to further contribute to the channel's growth, links for doing so are provided in the description. Please note, however, that this is entirely voluntary and not at all required. With all that having been said, I shall bid you farewell until tomorrow. Stay well.